Good afternoon. Welcome once again to the Glories of Hellenism. This afternoon, I have one of my favorite subjects, one of my favorite authors, and that's Nikos Kazantzakis, a real giant in world literature, not only Greek literature, but world literature. I remember when he was first introduced to the United States, he was particularly popular among the college students. A lot of the schools that I visited, when I was introduced as a person of Greek descent, and my parents are born in Greece, and a little personal background, they would invariably ask me about Kazantzakis. Did I know him? Had I met him? And it was amazing how popular he was at that time, a few years back, in the universities throughout the country. And I think his popularity endures throughout the world because his writing is so good and so powerful, graphic in many ways, and reflects the problems that people encounter in life that apply to people throughout the world, even though the settings are in Greece mostly. He has a universal appeal. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about Nikos Kazantzakis, a giant in literature who should have been awarded a Nobel Prize a long time ago, but I'm very sad to say that he was prevented from getting it through political maneuverings by the then government of Greece. Now, one of the reasons apparently was influence of the church. Kazantzakis was pretty critical of the church, and some of his books were comical in the way he poked fun at the church. And the higher authorities in the church in Greece resented that. Here in this country, they took it in stride and tried to understand the broader picture. But over in Greece, the reaction was anger. And I believe that that was one of the reasons why, when Kazantzakis' name had been submitted on several occasions, actually, for the Nobel Prize, it was the intervention of the Greek government way back in those years that prevented him from getting it. And I think that's a very sad chapter in the history of modern literature and in the history of Greece. I think if that were to be suggested today, the picture, the total situation has changed, and I don't think there'd be that kind of a problem. But his name endures through his works, and we're very lucky to have a man of his talent and his wisdom and his stature to be among the writers from Greece. And I might point out that, which I mentioned once or twice before, it's amazing how many great writers a small country like that has produced in this century. I think I mentioned Elitis last time, who has won several awards, international awards, for his writings, his poetry in particular. And there are others, and we won't go into those at this time. But today, just doing a short overview of some of the works of Nikos Kazantzakis. Now, I feel a little bit of a personal tie to him, even though I never had the privilege to meet him. My wife and I were very close friends of Kimon Fryer. Kimon Fryer was his best-known translator. He translated the Odyssey, which is his great classic. The Odyssey of Kazantzakis, which is called the modern sequel to Homer. He picked up where Homer left off. And if you haven't read that, if you haven't read any of Kazantzakis, I would strongly recommend that you start with the Odyssey. It's a big, thick book. You could start with shorter ones. You could start with Zorba and Report to Greco and those, but I would recommend starting with the Odyssey. It has a lot of depth. It has a lot of history, adventure, and it's a great, great book. And that, combined with several other books that he's written, really should have resulted in having the Nobel Prize for Literature conferred on this great writer. One of the reasons, as I mentioned, that I became acquainted with the works of Kazantzakis and became a big admirer was my close friendship with Kimon Fryer. My wife and I were very close to Kimon Fryer. Kimon Friar is an interesting person in his own right. He was born in Asia Minor, spent a lot of time in Greece, and later came to Chicago. Actually, he was very young when he came to Chicago with his parents and grew up there, and never went to Greek school. He just studied and learned Greek on his own and became the foremost translator of works in modern Greek literature, particularly those of Kazantzakis. Anyone who's familiar with the works of Kazantzakis, having read them in English, automatically knows about Kimon Friar, even though Kazantzakis had other translators as well for other books. And Friar's name was Kalogeropoulos, which in Greek means the son of a friar. And his father, I remember him telling us, shortened it to Friar, which is a pretty good translation, actually. Been more accurate to say Friar's son, but anyway, Kimon Friar. He was a poet in his own right, and in addition to doing the works that he did with Kazantzakis, he wrote critical reviews of poetry and literature for several publications in the United States, and he taught in a couple of colleges in the East. I first got acquainted with him, to go on a personal note, when I read some of his book reviews and poetry reviews in the New Republic. And I finally wrote him a letter. You know, a lot of us are reluctant to do that. We say, well, we ought to do this and we ought to do that. And I wrote him a letter. I said, I've been a fan of yours for years and interested in your name. It suggests some kind of Greek background, Kimon in particular. And he wrote back, and of course, and told me his story. And eventually we got together personally, and he visited us in our home, and we saw him many times thereafter. Became a very close friend. In fact, I was one of those instrumental in having him come to Cal State in San Francisco, where he taught a course in poetry, and became better known throughout the Bay Area in Northern California. And one of the many things I admired about Kimon Friar at that time was that he made himself readily available. Whenever a group anywhere, particularly in the Greek community, asked him to come to their group and lecture about modern Greek poetry in general, or Kazantzakis in particular, he never turned them down. And I attended several of those lectures. And I want to tell you, and those of you who were here at the time and had a chance to hear him, I think will agree with me, he's the most fascinating lecturer that I've ever heard. People say, well, you're going to go to a lecture on literature? You know, that's kind of dry. He made it come alive. He had such enthusiasm, and he was so articulate that when the lecture was over, most of us were sitting there waiting for more. We wanted to hear more. So that's so much for the leading translator of Kazantzakis, who was Kimon Friar. Now, my favorite book of Kazantzakis is Report to Greco, which I have here. And Greco was his grandfather. He calls it Report to Greco. It's a summing up of his life. It's kind of an autobiography of Kazantzakis. But I want to mention some of the other books. He's written several. One of his most famous is O Christos Xanastavronete, Christ Recrucified. It's a novel, and it became a movie, a very popular one, and was shown in the U.S. as well as around the world. And others of his books are the Fratricides, I have here. One of the most famous was The Last Temptation of Christ, which was made into a movie. Actually, it's the same as this other one, a different name. And Freedom or Death, a great novel. It's a historical novel based on the fight in Crete for freedom against the Turkish occupation of so many years. Very dramatic and very powerful. And another one that I would recommend to you is a biography written by his wife, Helen Kazantzakis. It's simply called Nikos Kazantzakis, a Biography. And my purpose here is not to give a scholarly review of his writings, but to introduce you to him in the hope that you will become interested yourself and will, if you haven't read any of his works, that you will you will try to do that. You'll enjoy it. He's not only an excellent writer, but one who, with his feet on the ground, who obviously has lived life to the fullest and understands people. Well, you can see that I've been carried away by my enthusiasm for Kazantzakis, and I've used up much more time than I should have. Let me just close by saying I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about this great writer, and to point out to you that in San Francisco, at San Francisco State University, we have a foundation in his name that is dedicated to Kazantzakis, and we have a visiting professor every year that is selected to come and stay for a year and teach Greek literature in general, but particularly to teach the works of Kazantzakis. Our friend Angelo Tsakopoulos was instrumental in funding that originally by putting in a very large sum of money. I think it was $200,000, maybe $250,000, to create the chair to carry on this work. Professor Mascaletis was very helpful at the time, who was teaching there, to establish this chair, and that's something we should be very proud of. That's something unique in the United States. There are very few chairs that I know of. I know of one at Harvard and maybe one or two other schools, but in all the universities of the country, which are so many in the United States, we should have a lot more attention focused on modern Greek literature. People who learn about it, who are not of Greek descent, and take a course like that, I've spoken to, come out with a great deal of enthusiasm. It opened our eyes to a whole new world. So I think all of us can help in that by inquiring at our local libraries if they have the works of Kazantzakis or other modern Greek authors and poets like Odysseus Selitis and others, because the more interest that's shown, the more they are likely to respond. Libraries are like stores. They're like businesses. They are there to serve the public. And if they get a lot of requests for particular authors, they'll see to it that books are acquired to meet the requests of the public. So the fault in not having too many books there is not in the libraries, it's in the people not asking for them. So I think after this program is over, you should call your local library and ask them how many works they have of Kazantzakis, and if you could go over there and borrow them. And that would get them started. And that's what we have today. A tribute to a great writer of modern Greece who has put Greece on the map in many ways through his books. Thank you.